Through my life, I've been surrounded by loving people that have given me strength. They have been cornerstones for me. They're just always there. Well, my mom and dad gave guidance through my younger years. My father's passed on, but my mother lives with me now. Now, my sons, Grant and Orion, oh, they've always been a joy for me. They're always ready to lend a hand. Well, I'd never get my quilts done without Teresa and Sue. And my cousin Carol Ann turns our quilts into works of art with her long arm quilting. I dedicate this quilt to the cornerstones of my life. Now, this one is just beautiful in a palette of fall colors with orange, green, and gold. And I just love those beige cornerstones dancing through the quilt. Well, Teresa pieced it and Sandy Thompson quilted it with tendrils of feathers blowing about. Well, Sue made this beautiful cornerstones quilt. She has greens and pinks and blues. Now, she first selected the multicolored fabric for the border, and then she repeated it in one of the blocks. Well, Sandy Thompson quilted it, and I just love the vine in the framing border. So pretty. Now, this queen-size quilt in soft pastels, just beautiful in yellows, pinks, greens, and blues. And those cornerstones just march right through in a straight line. Well, Linda Parker strip-pieced it with 2.5-inch strips, and my cousin Carol quilted it with a beautiful motif that just fills that whole area. Well, the cornerstones have helped me through my life. Now let me help you through this quilt. This is a 4-block version of the larger quilt that I just showed you. And Sandy Thompson did the machine quilting. She did a stippling throughout the print fabric and a 1/4 inch away. And then in those background squares, she did the cutest loop-de-loops and finished off with feathers in the border. It's just so beautiful. Well, it's easy to select the fabric for this quilt. You only need to have 4 different pieces plus 1 background. Now, fabric number 1 should literally jump out at you. And this is the one that I selected. It reads yellow, but it also has touches of blue, pink, and green in it. Number 1, and then straight across from it is another large-scale print for number 2. Blue background with touches of yellow, green, and pink. Now, fabrics 3 and 4, opposite each other, are just small-scale ferns. They read solid from a distance, just so you have those resting points for your eye. Now, the block starts right in the very center with a 9 patch. I already have my 2.5-inch strips cut. They are ready for sewing. Now, this is the first part of the 9 patch. This is the background, fabric number 1, and background again. And it is that good old 1/4 inch seam. Just flip the 2 pieces right sides together and set it up, the 1/4 inch seam and 15 stitches to the inch, because we're going to continuously cut across these seams. You know, this pattern is also known as chimneys and cornerstones. It's a log cabin variation that became popular after the Civil War. You know, after you have 1 background strip added on, just open it up and then add that 2nd background strip. Well, it was really to honor Abraham Lincoln. They had log cabin challenges. Oh, it was just so much fun. They would just have these different challenges at county fairs, and people would come up with all of these different variations just to show good old American individuality. So it is a traditional block, chimneys and cornerstones. Well, once you have your stripping done, you want to take it, place the darkest piece on the top, fabric number 1, set that seam, and then just lift and press right into fabric 1 on one side. Let me just close it, turn it over, and then on the 2nd seam, dark on the top, fabric 1, set the seam, and press right into it. You know, you only need to have 11 inches for a 4-block wall hanging. So I'm just going to take this one. This is the first unit of the 9 patch. The second unit has the number, fabric number 2, right in the center, background on each side, and the seams are also pressed in towards the middle or fabric number 2. The third part of the 9 patch is this one. This is fabric number 3, a background, and fabric number 4. So the easiest way is just to go ahead and stack these up and cut them into 2.5-inch sections. The easiest ruler to use is the 6 by 12. So let me just line up those edges right there. Just trim off, straighten that edge, get rid of all of them at the same time, and then line up 2.5 inches right on the ruler. Now the wall hanging uses 4 blocks, but if you want to go bigger, oh, how about a lap robe? You're going to do 12 blocks. Twin has 15, queen has 25, and king has 36. So you just go ahead, stack those up, get them all cut. Ooh, we've got a little extra here for another quilt. So then just take the 9 patch and lay it out. Here's fabric 1, fabric 2 on the opposite side, and then right here in the middle. How about I turn it this way? This is 3 and 4. Okay, take the middle piece and just flip it right sides together. And when you do that, those seams are going to lock together. Ooh, there is nothing better than locking seams. And I have the middle section right on the top. Line up those edges and just sew them together. You know, as I was growing up, my dad was in business. He was in the heating and air conditioning business. So it was typical for us to just sit and discuss business at dinner. And then whenever I finally went into business myself, I grew up, went into business myself, and my dad would always come here to Quilt in a Day, check us out on his Christmas vacation. Okay, let me open this up. Good match. All right. This piece goes right sides together to it. The seams once again locked together, get those all lined up. But he would come over on Christmas vacation. He would walk through, check out all of my employees, make sure everybody was in order. And every year, never failed, he would just kind of saunter up to me and say, "Well, Elle, are you making any money yet?" It's been a good life. Okay, I'm going to just take the 9 patch and from the wrong side, press both of those seams into the middle. Make sure, got it nice and flat on this side. Flip it over, check it out. On the back side, looks perfect. Now, before you go on, you want to check out your seam allowance because this patch right here, the 9 patch, should measure 6.5 inches. Ooh, that looks good. 6.5 inches square, because if you have a 6.5-inch 9 patch, the rest of the pieces are going to go together perfectly, and ooh, that is what you want. Well, now I'm going to start adding strips. I have strip number 3 and 4 ready to go, and they're just cut salvage to salvage. So easy. Just take your strip, and your strip, of course, is going to be placed exactly beside the same fabric. So I've got fabric 3 here. I'm going to flip it right sides together. I only have 1 patch, but I would assembly line sew more right onto that same strip if I had them all done. Oh my gosh, I've got to catch up. Okay, so flip the 9 patch right sides together to fabric 3 and just sew right along that seam. It's easy. You just keep on putting the same fabric beside the same piece in the 9 patch. Now, once you have that sewn on there, with your ruler, line up a straight edge, just trim off that salvage edge, get rid of that, and I'm just going to move my ruler right down here. You would be cutting in between blocks. Cut that off, and then on the opposite side, we can go ahead, just turn it over, fabric 4, is done exactly the same way. Just flip it right sides together, line it up. You would be assembly line sewing every one of those pieces right down along there. So let me just line this up and butt it on there. Well, of course my mom taught me to sew. Where would I be without my mom teaching me to sew? I used to get fantastic Christmas gifts whenever I was a little girl. Oh, I can remember cheating at Christmas. I would always hide behind the couch and open my gifts early just to see if I got a sewing project. And then I found out it was a good reason for me to grow fingernails because I could hardly get into those boxes without messing them up. So take these, trim them off, get rid of this edge, and then once you have fabric 3, fabric 4 sewn on each side, just set those seams open and press the seams away from that block. Well, we're nearly done with round 1. If your 9 patch was 6.5 inches, then right now I have the rest of the round. This is fabric 1. It is 6.5 inches because my 9 patch was 6.5 inches, and I sewed a background to each side, and the same thing with fabric 2, 6.5 inches with the background on each side. Now, if yours is a different measurement, go ahead and cut that strip that same measurement. This is once again 2.5 inches. So let me just square off that edge right here, get rid of this, and cut it. As many as you have blocks, you cut these 2.5-inch pieces. Now, it's easy. Yellow beside yellow. Those seams will lock together. Blue beside blue. Seams will lock. This is the end of round 1. Let me get round 2 ready. Check it out. Your round 1 should measure 10.5 inches. And if your patch measures 10.5 inches, you are doing great. Well, round 2 is exactly the same. You're just going to take the strips of fabric 3, place it beside the correct fabric, and fabric 4, and just assembly line sew them right on the sides. So just take this piece, flip it right sides together. You know, it's typical, especially since my dad was in business, I went in business, and then my son Grant went in business. But he's just doing so fantastic with 2 warehouses right here in this country, 1 warehouse in Mexico. It is just phenomenal. Well, my brother was watching him. Bruce was watching him, and he said, you know, tell me, Grant, how is it that you are doing so great? What is it? How did you learn all of that? And Grant said, well, my mom didn't tell me, but I just watched her. I thought that was such a kind compliment from a 30-year-old son. So perfect. All right, I am getting these 2 strips on here. As soon as your strips are on, you can go ahead and assembly line sew all of those blocks right down those strips. Then just lay them flat before you open them up. Take your ruler, cut the fabric the same size as the block. How about a little off here, a little off here? Let's take these and get rid of them. Turn the block around and then trim on the other side. I like to use as many straight lines as I can. So I've squared up the ruler line right on the block. And then just take this patch, set the seam with the dark pieces on the top. Fabric 3, fabric 4, open and press right in there. Ooh, I just love all these soft pastels. There's nothing like pastels to make you feel really relaxed. Well, if your patch in round 1 was 10.5 inches square, then it's the same thing. You cut a round 1, piece of fabric 1, 10.5 inches, background strips on each side. Same thing with fabric 2, 10.5 inches, background on each side, and cut off 2.5-inch sections. And they are going to lock together right here is the first piece, and then the second piece goes right here, and that completes the block. Now it should measure approximately 14.5 inches square. When you're done pressing, these seams lay perfectly flat from the center out. Now come along with me. Through Quilt in a Day, you'll meet all of the cornerstones of my life. Just take the same trip my dad took. I depend on the cornerstones in my life. This is my art director, Merritt Voigtlander. Together we make sure all my books are accurate and easy to follow. I write the instructions and he brings them to life with illustrations and photographs. At this point, we're working together on the still stripping after 25 years. My assistant, Sue Bouchard, keeps track of where I am and where I'm going to be. Well, no one can pack a suitcase quite like Sue. Just look at her go. Teresa Varnes sews away in her quilter's dream. She makes tons of samples for my quilt programs and road presentation quilts. And I bet you thought I did all those quilts myself. Well, I couldn't do without my cornerstones. Place your first block with fabric number 1 in the upper left-hand corner. And then that's your starting point. Build from that. So I have blue across from blue, going down here, pink across from pink. And for this last block, I'm going to place it so that it's green across from green, a yellow across from yellow. Then go to your lattice. Now your lattice is cut 2.5 inches wide by the length of your block. My block was 14.5 inches, but you know it's all based on your individual seam allowance. So you need to be careful. Check your block so you know how long to cut. Now, take your lattice and place it around the outside edges. When Linda Parker did her quilt, she forgot to put the lattice around the outside edges. You really need to have it just to give you your size of quilt. So it fits on your bed or finishes out the pattern on your wall hanging. For each fabric, you need to have 3 of the 4 different fabrics, and it'll work just perfect. Okay, I've got a blue over here, and the very last one is that yellow. After the lattice is in place, then take your 2.5-inch cornerstones, and they go right in these empty spots. Now, how easy is this? You're going to see how that all goes together. And once you have your cornerstones in place, you sew your whole top together by sewing vertical rows first. Just go from top to bottom, and then whenever you go back across in your quilt, you're going to press your seams towards the lattice. That way, all those seams will lock together. Let me get mine finished for you. I'm stepping my way through this quilt. I've added my framing border and my outside border. Now I'm getting it ready for some machine quilting. I like to use these binder clamps. They work great for just stretching out your backing. You take your backing and you place it wrong sides down. You stretch it, but you don't pull it flat, and then just wrap those binding clamps right around there. Next comes the batting, and I'm using 80% cotton, 20% polyester, so you can see a nice depth in the quilting. And then I just like to take those same binder clamps, pull them out from underneath, stretch that batting flat, and put it on top. Now the quilt top comes right side up, and so you don't stretch it. Just take your 6 by 24 inch ruler and just go like this until you have it flat but not tight. Now, the easy way to quilt this would be with a walking foot and just some straight lines. So I like to mark the quilt with straight lines with my 6 by 24 ruler and a Hera marker. You just work the Hera marker just as if you work a rotary cutter. Just line it up with that ruler. Just draw your lines right across there. Now, if you don't like to draw a bunch of lines, let me show you what you can do. You're going to use your walking foot just to sew along that line with 10 stitches to the inch. It's a long stitch, but if you don't want to draw every line, just take your quilting attachment and it'll slip right on the back of your walking foot, and then you can set it up so that the guide falls on the line you drew and your walking foot goes along there. You could do all just diagonal lines all over the quilt, or you could get fancy. What if you'd like to do some stencils? Well, you want to find one that is called a free motion stencil, something like this. A free motion stencil that has continuous lines on it. And usually I take my finger first and just stitch around it just to see if that'll go continuously. And then you can also take a pencil and say, okay, how am I going to stitch this? I'm just going to pretend I'm a needle. So you practice and you get the whole feel of that stencil just by drawing it out. Now, once you have a selected stencil, something that has continuous lines, do a practice one. Trace it out, do all of your stitching along there, make sure it looks good. Now, this one fits perfectly right in the center of the large square, or you can also just place half of it right in the sides. I'm using a disappearing pen, and you get it positioned perfectly. Let me see. All right, and then you just go in the lines with your pen, mark your lines continuously. And if you mark them just as if you're going to stitch them, then whenever you take that away, you can see how it looks. Now, once your marking is done, then you safety pin your 3 layers together. I like to use pin covers on my 1-inch pins. And you just take the pin cover, take the wide end of it, and stick the end of the pin right into it. Now, these are needle nose pliers. You just snap that pin right in place. And then with this pinning tool, you pin wherever you haven't marked. And you can just run right along there, put all of your pins in place. Now, once your pinning is done, you're going to do your stitching, either with your walking foot or with your darning foot. And with your darning foot, you drop your feed dogs and just continuously stitch on the line. Well, once all of your stitching is done, then you can spritz those lines out with some water. And let me just show you here. You just give a lot of water, and that line will completely disappear on you. Make sure it might come back, then just spritz it again. Well, Judy Jackson did this quilting. It is absolutely beautiful. All free motion quilting, and it is ready for binding. Life is just a bowl of cherries. And what is more fun than life and cherries? Well, this Cornerstone quilt is just as much fun. And it's quite cheery with these red checks and green checks. And then big juicy cherries complete with stems make up the 3rd fabric. And small cherries bouncing about make up the 4th fabric. Now these yellow cornerstones liven it up even more. Now the quilting is simple. It's just straight lines going through here and then stitch in the ditch around the cornerstones. Ooh, and look at the back. More cherries. It's just so cute. And this 14-inch block is perfect for a pillow too. It makes just a great decorator setting. Now this charming country quilt has color variations with the 9 patch all the same right in the center. Round 1 is the green, round 2 is this rosy plaid, and then the lattice is all green checked. It's just so cute. Looks completely different, doesn't it? Well, Orion's friend Effie gave him this fabric. Teresa put it together, and Amy did large stippling throughout just to finish it off. So cute. Now, if life gives you pits, a scrappy quilt is the road to happiness. Well, the 9 patches are identical. They're all the pink. But after that, each round is different. Everything's scrappy. Nothing predictable at the fabrics at all. And then Sandy Thompson did some diagonal line quilting, big old leaves throughout the quilt. Well, may your life be a bowl of cherries, and may you surround yourself with cornerstones. So enjoy your quilting.